We also look forward every week being joined by Brent Hubbs of AllQuest.com. His appearance brought to you by Diversified Enclosures and Screens. From design to installation, they got you covered. Brent, how are you?
I'm doing good, Jimmy. Hope you're doing well.
We're doing fantastic. Do want to ask you about one of Tennessee's most recent commitments, wide receiver Cam Miller. How big of a pickup do you think that was?
Well, I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One, I think he's a guy with talent. I like his frame, Jimmy. I've said this a couple of different times on our podcasts that we've done. I've been to his high school, and I'm not trying to be critical of it. They don't have the greatest facilities. They don't have the biggest weight rooms. They don't have a lot of the things that you see at some other schools in the city of Memphis, certainly not what they have at some places in Nashville and other states. So I want to see what he does when he gets into some legitimate training, year-round nutrition and all of those types of things. I think that he will lean up a little bit. I think he'll get a little bit faster and quicker and be an even more effective player. But I think he can play outside. I think he can play inside. And I think his frame is his biggest asset. I also think this, too, Jimmy, when you come out and you talk about Tennessee takeover and you stand at your opening press conference and you talk about, winning in the state of Tennessee, and he didn't say putting a fence around it, but certainly taking care of the state of Tennessee and recruiting, you got to go win some in-state battles. And this is an important in-state battle to win, in my opinion. And Tennessee needs to sign several players from the state. They're not going to have as good of a year in the state as I think anybody would have hoped when you talk about this class overall. But you got to win every battle you can get, and getting Cam Miller, I think, was a big win.
It's always difficult to project how much better a player is going to get. But, Brent, based on what you said and maybe the lack of facilities at Cam Miller's high school, this sounds like a guy that's got the potential to be much better in college.
Well, yeah, I like his upside. I do. I like his upside a lot, Jimmy, but because of what we're talking about. I think he can. I don't think he's maxed out. Okay, sometimes you get a player, and I think this is kind of what you're talking about. You get a player, and he's really good as a senior in high school, but he's kind of tapped out, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot. There's not a whole lot more room for growth and development, and I don't think that's the case at all with Cam Miller from a physical standpoint. I think he is going to get better. I like his personality, having spent some time with him. I like the way he carries himself and goes about his business. I think from a culture standpoint, he's a really good fit. His dad's his high school coach. He's a veteran coach, and has been in the Memphis area for a long time, coaching at a small high school now. His dad's his personal track coach in the high jump, and they have a really good relationship. His dad was very involved in the recruiting process, and I think his dad was very comfortable with Josh Heupel. And I think Cam hit it off really well with Cody Burns, and I think that the whole family is comfortable with the way things are moving and the direction things are going at Tennessee. So again, I think it's a good pickup, and I'm with you. I think his best football is definitely ahead of him.
If you want to join us, 656-9900, 1-866-656-9900.
Brent, do you view Mo Clipper in a similar sort of way that, that maybe there's some more development that can be made there at Tennessee?
Well, I think anytime with an offensive lineman bench, you're always looking at more development. You just don't have, and now there's more now than there used to be, but you don't have a ton of guys who come in really ready to go as a freshman. And I think Mo he's not a project from a physical standpoint. He's not going to have to come in and put on 25 or 30 pounds or anything like that. I mean, he has the size. I think, in fact, he could probably afford to drop a little weight. I think that'll be something they talk to him about when he gets here. If there's one thing on Mo, I think you want to see Mo be a little more aggressive, maybe be a little more nasty. He plays hard. It's not that, but I think you want to see him maybe drive some guys through the whistle a little bit more and get a little bit more of an edge about him when you watch him on tape. I've not seen him play in person. I know in talking to him, he's a super kind of relaxed, nice guy. I think you'd want a little bit more of a nasty disposition, and I think that's something that he can develop and will need to develop in college. But again, here's a guy that had an Alabama offer early, Auburn, Virginia Tech, Louisville, some other schools, and Tennessee just really, really did a nice job with him and his family on the official visit up here. Mo came up for an unofficial visit for the spring game. I guess it was, or the spring game or that open practice, one or the other in the spring, and got a chance to see Tennessee from the stands, but had not really interacted with him, and then came up on his official visit. And Tennessee just really wowed. The whole Tennessee program really wowed Mo and his family and made him feel very comfortable up here. When you talk to Mo after the Tennessee visit, you had a feeling that Tennessee was in a really good spot with Mo Clipper because of the way that visit went.
And Brent, just to catch up with your opinion on another one of the commits from last week, Squirrel White, give us your thoughts on that speedy wide receiver from Alabama.
Well, you said it best, and when I got started in this business in '94, the one thing David Cutcliffe, who I've got a ton of respect for, told me, and Jimmy, I know you've heard this a million times, speed never had a bad day. Yep. And Squirrel White can run, and I think that's where it starts with him. And I think he can play the slot, inside spot if he wants to. If you want him to play there, I think he can play outside. And again, you just can't teach that kind of speed. He's got terrific speed, and here's a guy that camped really well at Alabama. The difference with Alabama is, they've got a kid in California, I think a kid up in the Eastern Seaboard, and a kid in Florida that, are all rated higher and are probably more polished than Squirrel White is right now, and they don't have room for Squirrel White. But they like Squirrel White, and they like the upside for Squirrel White when they had him at camp, because he was impressive down there. And obviously, here's another guy who came in and impressed Tennessee. And I think if you talk to Alex Golish and you talk to Josh Heupel and you sit down and say, what are you looking for in a receiver first and foremost, they're always going to come back to speed over height and weight and all those things. And Squirrel White hits that measurable through the, out of the park, because he can run.
Our guest, Brent Hubbs of AllQuest.com. Brent, Tennessee went from not being in Walter Nolan's top 8 to being in their top 5. Talk about the ground that Tennessee made up with Walter Nolan.
Well, getting him on campus twice for unofficial visits, including with his parents, I think was a big part of that, Jimmy. I think getting, Walter getting in front of the staff and spending some time with his staff, I think is a big reason why they got his attention. Rodney Garner has worked that family and has worked Walter really hard, and has continued to have very frank and very real conversations with him. And I think that's something that Walter Nolan and his family have probably appreciated the most is, that there's not a whole lot of sugarcoating going on. I think because they were behind, Tennessee was behind, I think Coach Garner just kind of laid it all out on the table and was very frank with what, he felt like Walter needed, and why Tennessee was a good fit for him, and why it would work for him at Tennessee, and talked about people he had developed through the years, obviously, in the long time in the SEC, and, development on and off the field. And I think a lot of those things got his attention with Tennessee and has them in the top 5. I still think they're trailing, Jimmy. I don't think that they are, necessarily out front. I think it's still going to be an upset, in my opinion, if they land Walter Nolan. But they went from not being a factor at all to being in the hunt. And he's been on campus twice. I think they can get him back for an official visit maybe in the fall, because it doesn't look like he's going to do anything right now. There was some thought he might do something in August. I'm not sure he's going to. If he waits and Tennessee can get him in on an official visit, then who knows what happens there. But obviously they've made up a lot of ground, and I think part of it is because of some real frank conversations they had with him and his family on campus.
Do you think, is Nolan going to move to Knoxville? I've heard rumors.
Yeah, that's the plan. Now, he's not, to my knowledge, he's not anywhere yet, but that has been the plan, is that he was going to end up in Knoxville. And I know Catholic High School has been talked about. Powell High School has been talked about. I don't know. I mean, I don't think he's here and working out with anybody right now, but that may be taking place as we speak. But my anticipation for him, and I've not talked to him in the last couple of weeks, but my anticipation, based on everybody I've spoken with, said that he is going to be playing football in East Tennessee this fall.
Does that increase Tennessee's chances of getting him?
Well, it can't hurt. I mean, because, why not go over and watch Tennessee play every Saturday after you played a home game on Friday night? It's a lot easier to get to Neyland Stadium if you're living in Knoxville, Tennessee, than it is to get to Baton Rouge, right? Or to get to some other place, Alabama or some other place. Not that you can't get there on a Saturday morning, but it's a lot more convenient to drive 20 minutes, from wherever you're living and get to Neyland Stadium that way. So what you would hope would be that it would open up an opportunity for him to be around the program more in an unofficial capacity, come over for a practice, go to games, that type of thing. And if that's the case, it can't hurt because it would enhance Tennessee's relationships, with him and help continue to grow those relationships.
Our guest, Brent Hubbs of BallQuest.com. His appearance brought to you by Diversified Enclosures and Screens. From design to installation, they got you covered. If you have a question or comment for Brent, give us a call, 656-9900, 1-866-656-9900. Let's go to Steve. Steve, you're on with Brent Hubbs.
Hello.
Hey, Steve.
Hey. Brent, I'd heard that the offensive lineman from Detroit admitted to us a while back that he'd been named most valuable players at a couple of camps. Do you know if that is true?
I think he had it a couple. I don't put a ton of stock in that, and that's not. I think he's a good player. Okay, I like to pick up a lot, Steve. So I'm not trying to knock that. The one thing that you have to be careful about with that is you don't know what the competition was like at the camp. You don't know how many players were at that camp. So I think sometimes, you got to be careful not to get caught up in too much of that stuff. But
right.
I do like him as a player. I like his size. He looks the part. Okay, let me say that. I've not watched him, and that's a hard position for me to even evaluate anyway. But when you see him, he looks the way an SEC lineman is supposed to look. I really like his physical makeup for sure.
Right. I got one more question. The tight end, whatever, from Cincinnati committed to us months back. Talk about him a little bit. Do you think he's somebody's a pretty darn good prospect down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that jumps out about him that Tennessee is they like his size. They like this combination of athletic ability, speed to go with the size. That position, sometimes you find a guy who can really run, who's really good in 7-on-7 stuff, and make all the acrobatic catches. But you look at them, and they're not big enough to be an inline tight end. They're more of just a wide receiver who is a little bit too big to play wide receiver, so he plays tight end on his team. But Brody Foley's probably 6'5", and a half, goes 235 pounds right now. So he's going to be big enough that he can flex out and cause some matchup issues as a receiving tight end. But at the same time, too, he's going to be able to slide in and play in line as a blocking tight end. And remember this, too, for the tight end position. When you want to play as fast as Josh Heupel wants to play, Jimmy, you can't have a running tight end who's a blocker and then a pass-catching tight end because you don't want to substitute a lot of times. So what you want to do is you want a guy who's got enough versatility. He can put his hand in the ground, in line, and block in the run game if he needs to. He can also flex out and play, as a big receiver in the passing game, or you can even use him as an H-back. For example, if it's 2nd and 10 and you get 9 yards on 2nd down and it's 3rd and 1, they want to go fast. But you may need that tight end to block in the run game there. That guy's got to be able to do both. And I think that's one of the things that was very appealing to them about Brody Foley when you look at him and you look at his physical makeup.
Brent, switching gears a little bit, Kennedy Chandler was a point guard on the under-19 national team that went to Latvia and won a gold medal. How much do you think that experience will help him as a freshman point guard at Tennessee?
Well, Jimmy, I think it helps because, there's some pressure representing your country, right? I mean, this is not a pickup game in the summertime, okay? I mean, you're there to win the gold medal for your country. And so I think there's a little bit of pressure that comes with that, and I think that's not a bad thing for a young player to get a handle on because, when you play, even against great competition, but you're playing summer leagues and AAU stuff, winning the championship's not as important as putting on a good show for yourself so you can get more attention in recruiting. Okay, that's what a lot of summer basketball is about. So to be in that kind of competitive environment, I think is good for Kennedy Chandler. I think it helps. There's probably, and Rob said this in our podcast, there's probably been some pickup games that Kennedy Chandler's played in Memphis against some of the Grizzly players that have probably been better competition, but they're not keeping score the same way, right? There's no pressure to win and no pressure to hold up to a standard of representing your country and living up to the expectation that you're supposed to win that medal. And so I think it was a good experience for him. Thankfully, he's not hurt after a scary incident there where it looked like it might have been a serious injury, but it's not. And so I think it's good for him to get that kind of experience because he's getting ready to face a lot of pressure in the SEC, pressure from his head coach to be the point guard. Rick Barnes is not an easy guy to play point for. And Kennedy Chandler is going to be given the ball from day one. And so I think it was a good experience for him, Jimmy, and I think it's something he can benefit from this fall.
What did Chandler say? Coach Barnes has been on my tail every day.
Yes, and will be until Kennedy Chandler stops answering Rick Barnes' phone call, even after he's a pro. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But you know what? Kennedy Chandler knew that, and that's what attracted attracted Kennedy Chandler to Tennessee. He wanted Rick Barnes to push him. He wanted to be coached hard, and so there'll be days where it'll be really tough, but there are going to be more days where it's going to be fun for Kennedy Chandler, and it's going to really help him develop, which is what he wanted when in deciding to come to Tennessee.
Our guest, Brent Hubbs of VolQuest.com. His appearance brought to you by Diversified Enclosures and Screens. From design to installation, they got you covered. There's only one word to describe this, Vince. Pandemonium. Pandemonium.
That'll be used tomorrow as well.
We'll say it again tomorrow.
That's right.
And we mean it.
Yep.
So, a lot of folks here registering, got a lot of qualifiers here, and we're going to have a winner that'll be announced in the 6 o'clock hour. Our guest, Brent Hubbs of VolQuest.com. His appearance brought to you by Diversified Enclosures and Screens. To join us, 656-9900, 1-866-656-9900. Let's go to the phones where Roger is our next caller. Hello, Roger.
Well, hey, Jimmy and Vince. How y'all doing?
Good. How you doing, Roger?
Good, Roger.
They're fine. Good to talk to y'all. Hey, Brent, buddy. Hey, doing, Brent?
I'm doing great, Roger. Hope you're well, buddy.
Yeah, they're fine. Hey, I just wanted to ask you, Brent, about recruiting. I was just curious about you, about if you can tell me or not. You probably know more about that. That's why I asked you about recruiting. I heard that Josh Hopper is behind on recruiting-wise against a lot of players. I want to ask you, Brent, how far is Tennessee from getting? How far is Josh Hopper behind? For getting some, how far behind is Josh Hopper from for getting behind on recruiting-wise for getting a lot of players from catching up and stuff behind? Is he?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple things. One, he's behind in this class because he comes from Central Florida, and a lot of the players that they're recruiting now, they weren't recruiting at Central Florida. They did not recruit the state of Tennessee very hard when they were in Orlando, and they're in some areas where they haven't recruited before but because of where they are geographically. So that's one thing. Two, he got here in mid-January, couldn't go on the road recruiting, still hasn't been able to go on the road recruiting, and his staff hasn't been able to go out and evaluate guys. So it's been try to get as many as you can on campus, and I think they did a nice job with that. But they probably did a better job getting 23s and 24s, guys in the class of 23 and 24, than they did, guys in the class of 22, because a lot of those class of 22 guys were taking official visits. They weren't coming to camps, and they weren't coming to work out. So I think that all of that is got Josh Heupel playing catch up in the class of 22, and the pending NCAA stuff is working against them a little bit as well. So, I think you're always behind when you have a transition at the coaching position, and I think it's probably magnified a little bit because nobody could go out in the spring and evaluate, and then throw on top of that, you got a never-ending NCAA investigation, seemingly. And, putting that to bed as soon as they can would not be a bad thing for Tennessee in recruiting at all.
Brent, you were talking about the tight ends under Josh Heupel's offense, that they're going to need to be able to stay on the field and do whatever is needed of them in that situation. Who do you think is the best candidate among the tight ends to be able to execute two ways and do whatever they need?
Well, I mean, I think when you look at it, if Austin Pope can stay healthy, but we've never really seen him be a pass-catching tight end, but he did that at CAK. He caught a ton of balls in high school, so he's got good hands. It's just a matter of him, staying healthy. Does the back hold up? Princeton Fan is a guy who I think can play H-back. I think he can play tight end. I think he can flex out. I think he's probably as versatile as anybody, and is a guy who seems to have found a home at that position. Miles Campbell is a guy that I think has really soft hands. He's probably not as fast, as a guy like Fant, but I think he's got good size. And I think that's a guy who's gotten physically better. One of the reasons his stock went up in recruiting as a senior is because he could play in line at tight end and was more physical. So I still think he's got to grow there, but I like the upside of Miles Campbell. But as for right now, I think you would probably look at the two veterans, Austin Pope and Princeton Fant. Now, some people are going to ask about Jacob Warren, and I think the question with Jacob Warren is he heavy enough in the seat to hold up as a blocking guy in line? And I think that's something we'll learn more about as he works in this offense this fall. There'll be times they substitute tight ends. I don't want to imply that they're not. And there'll be some specialty packages where they do some things and make some substitutions. But there will also be times in the speed-up game where they'll want to be able to play a tight end inside and outside, on the line and flexed out. And you're looking for guys in recruiting moving forward, and you want some guys on your current roster to be able to do that to help you with your hurry-up offense.
Brent, as far as the tight end situation that they were talking about, you mentioned a tight end that they have that's coming in. Do you think that is a big priority with this staff, tight ends?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a part of, what Alex Golesh wants to do. I think if you look at his time at Iowa State, the tight ends were a big factor and a big part of things. Heupel has had, some times where he's been he's really used the tight end when he's had the type of weapon that he wants there and can be successful with it. And if he doesn't have the type of weapon there, then he puts an extra receiver on the field. And that's kind of been the story of Tennessee's offense for the last, Jimmy, 35 years, something like that. Yeah. I mean, if they've got a guy, if they got a guy who can be a weapon at tight end, then they're going to play the tight end. But if they don't have a guy that they think can really be a weapon for them beyond being a blocker, then they've just, through the years, going back to the early 80s when they brought some of the spread stuff in back then, they just play an extra wide receiver. And so I think Heupel's a little more flexible there. I think Golesh is a guy who's probably used the tight end a little bit more consistently in his other stops, and we'll see how they use it moving forward. I mean, I do think they want that to be a part of their weapons, but I don't think it's going to be a situation where a tight end is going to catch 40 or 50 balls in this offense. I could be wrong, but I'd be a little surprised if somebody, unless it was an All-American type player, I don't know that just they're going to throw it to the tight end that many times. I think they targeted the tight end like 21 times a year ago, something like that. I could see them targeting a tight end, in this offense as much as they're going to throw it, 30 times, 35 times, but I don't know that you're going to see a tight end catch, 50, 60 balls in this offense.
Yeah. Our guest, Brent Hubbs of AllQuest.com, is appearance brought to you by Diversified Enclosures and Screens, and he joins us on the Stanley Fencing Gates hotline. Let's go to the phones where Bill is our next caller. Hello, Bill.
Hey, how you doing, guys? Hey, Brent, a couple of questions. Do you think Tennessee or Heupel is looking to take maybe only 20 this time and holding those scholarships for the investigation? And secondly, what area would you say that the Vols have less good coaching, not recruiting, but coaching this year versus last year's team? And I'll hang up and listen. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
That last question is really hard to answer because I've not seen this staff work. I've not seen what they do from a player development. Now, let me say this. I mean, they have reputations, right? I know enough about Willie Martinez and Rodney Garner covering this league and having covered both of those coaches when they were here before, that I know what those guys do from a development standpoint. I think both of those guys are really good coaches and really good developers of talent. But it's not fair for me to judge the rest of those guys until I see them work. I mean, for Cody Burns, this is his first real Power 5 job. He's in a new offense. I'm not saying he can't coach, but I mean, I've never seen him work, and I've never seen how much guys improve. I mean, they had 15 practices in the spring. You can't pass judgment on that in any way, shape or form, in my opinion. And, so it's hard for me to answer that question. As for his first question, I don't think they'll hold scholarships. I think they will use their 25. I think whenever Tennessee announces a self-imposed penalty, I think they would announce a self-imposed penalty on the 85 number of scholarships, not on the initial of 25. And I don't think Tennessee is going to be up against the 85 number now unless they give some walk-ons, some scholarships. So I think if they're going to do a self-imposed scholarship reduction, I think it'll be against the 85 number, Jimmy, not the initial number of 25.
Yeah. And this may sound a little bit harsh, but it's hard for me to see Tennessee going 3-7 last year and say they were well coached in any area. Right?
No, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Listen, Jim Chaney was paid, $6 million to make an offense go and to fix quarterback problems, and it didn't happen. Whether he was the quote quarterback's coach or not the quarterback's coach, he did not get production out of that position, which he's always been able to do wherever he's been, and that's a part of why they went 3-7. No doubt about that. And they certainly struggled in defending the middle of the field against the pass. Was that scheme? Was that Derek Ansley's scheme compared to Kevin Shear's? I don't think there was a big difference in scheme because it was Jeremy Pruitt's defense. But they clearly struggled at the linebacker position a year ago. And they struggled, I thought they struggled in the secondary a year ago. Yeah. So, Jimmy, when you go 3-7, you can't look at that team at the end of last year and say, boy, they're well coached. That was a well-coached team. Also can't look at that staff from a year ago and say, boy, they had 10 bad coaches. Because I think Jim Chaney's not a bad coach. I think he's got a resume to suggest that he is a good coach. Right. Jeremy Pruitt's been a successful coach. And that's why I think it's hard to pass judgment with these new 10 guys in, because you haven't seen them work with this roster. You haven't seen them work with this schedule and see how they develop. Again, I know more about Willie Martinez and Rodney Garner having covered them in the past and having followed their work in this conference because they both coached in this conference a long time.
Brent, what's going on with VolQuest?
We've got plenty of recruiting coverage. Rob Lewis is in the middle of our opponent preview breakdowns. Today was Florida. We've got our mailbag podcast up today. We'll have the War Room tomorrow. We've got opponent previews throughout the weekend. We've got some more recruiting coverage coming up with some updates on some kids who have been in town or were in town in June that we're trying to catch up with. And obviously we're continuing to follow some of these other guys out here as July has been a pretty busy month in terms of making news. We'll see if Tennessee makes any more in the coming days and weeks. And, of course, we go to FCC Media Days on Tuesday and then, 2.5 weeks from the start of fall camp or something like that. So we're almost to the finish line of the summer and about into the middle of it in terms of getting ready for football season.
It's around the corner. Hey, Brent, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it, guys.
That's Brent Hubbs. He's on the Stanley Fencing and Gates hotline. His appearance brought to you by Diversified Enclosures and Screens. From design to installation, they've got you covered.